Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever or whenever you are. Welcome to this audio guide on the age of Andrew Jackson. This will be day 2. If you are in my class, Mr. David Swanson here, Bacon County High School, room 1206. If you're in my class, you're probably watching this because either I'm not here or you have missed class and you're catching up on our learning. If you find yourself Googling late at night, man, I wonder what Andrew Jackson did. Who is this guy? Find yourself on this YouTube video. Welcome. And come on in, I'm going to teach you something about Andrew Jackson. This is day 2 of our learning about Andrew Jackson. In my class, you know that you have your follow along, fill in the blank notes. You have the Andrew Jackson baseball card. And if you've been flipping through your toolbox, you see a couple of supplementary articles. And you'll even get to a page that says the Second Great Awakening. That's a page we're going to address today as well. So giddy up for the learning. Here we go. A bit of a warm up here. You can look at this for yourself. And question number 1, what president is pictured and what bill is it? Well, some context clues. We're talking about Andrew Jackson. That is Andrew Jackson. A little bit harder because it's trimmed out of the picture. You may recognize that as a $20 bill. You carried Andrew Jackson around in your pocket your whole life. Whether you knew it or not, Andrew Jackson is the face of the $20 bill. So you might have one in your pocket right now. A couple other questions. What did he do in the War of 1812? I hope you remember. What is his nickname? I hope you remember as well. War of 1812, he was a major general, and he won the Battle of New Orleans, gained fame and popularity. He uses that to rise to the presidency. And his nickname is Old Hickory because he is just a tough dude, as we learned in part 1. This 2-part class is called Jackson Versus. We learned that Jackson takes on several opponents, almost like a boxing match. In our first class, we talked about Jackson versus the Native Americans and kind of a negative part of his legacy. The very last thing you did was you put Andrew Jackson on trial. Was Andrew Jackson responsible for the deaths of over 4,000 Cherokee Indians who walked along the Trail of Tears, died along the Trail of Tears? I'll be very interested to read your answers when you turn in your work packet, so I hope you put some good thought into that. Today we're going to move on. Jackson's going to take on a couple more opponents, and he is going to start with the National Bank. Jackson versus the National Bank. So the National Bank had been chartered since the days of Alexander Hamilton. Andrew Jackson thinks that it's a tool of the elite. That's his quote, a tool of the elite, more reflective of his former opponents, especially John Quincy Adams, a son of wealth, the founding son from that founding father's generation. Andrew Jackson has clearly been elected to represent a different type of person, the frontiersman, the Westerner. He was an orphan. He's a veteran. So his whole presidency represents a shift in politics. And the National Bank, for him, it's something from the past generation, the previous powers that be, and just not for him. He thinks it's a tool of the wealthy. He actually calls it a den of vipers and thieves that preyed upon the poor and working class. And we've done this several times in this class already. Maybe you've noticed that our leaders, John Smith, the Puritans, and others that we've mentioned so far, have used Christian scripture to get their point across. And Andrew Jackson does that exactly here. A den of vipers and thieves actually references Matthew chapter 12, verse 34. John the Baptist refers to a brood of vipers. And Luke chapter 19, Jesus turns the tables over, and he says, "You've made my father's house into a house of thieves, a den of thieves." So Andrew Jackson kind of combines that language there. And my point in that is he knows who he's talking to. He's talking to those who have read the Bible. He's talking to those who are trying to follow Jesus in the Bible they read. And to get his point across, he uses language they would represent, language they would understand, language from Scripture. So suffice it to say, does not like the National Bank. Now, the charter for the National Bank, it was not a permanent thing. It was chartered for 10 years at a time. And Andrew Jackson vetoes its charter in the year 1832. He revokes it. He does not renew it. And what he does instead is he takes all that money and he places the money in state banks. And unfortunately, there's actually these banks are nicknamed pet banks. So all the money being put into the state banks basically cripples the National Bank. He has vetoed it. It is not up for recharter. He starts to bleed it dry by putting its money, the National Bank's money, in smaller banks called pet banks. And basically, the National Bank won't be able to survive being bled of its money. Well, Jackson actually creates an entire political party in opposition. It's not his party, but the Whig Party, that's WHIG. The Whig Party is created in opposition to Jackson. And the Whigs are basically the New Federalists. They are in favor of the National Bank, and they're not Republicans. Okay, we have not had the birth of the Republican Party yet. I did tell you Jackson was the first modern Democrat, and the Whigs are going to be his opponents. And the Whigs specifically retaliate by lessening credit. That makes less money in circulation, and this creates a bit of a mini depression, or the word panic. The Panic of 1837. So not the Great Depression, but a bit of a spending panic because there's just less cash available. All this to say, this is not something we deal with today. There is no national bank today. All banks are private. If you're thinking about, well, what's the Bank of America? That's a private bank. It's just the name of the private bank. It is not the American bank. So all banks are private today. This is not an issue we deal with today. And this is seen as a victory for Andrew Jackson against the elites of America. He has done well to represent the common man. He has taken down the wealthy elites. An entire political party has been formed against him, and still he wins by canceling, vetoing, doing away with the national bank. So summary, Jackson versus the national bank, point Andrew Jackson, because the national bank goes away. Next up, Jackson versus the bureaucracy. So first of all, I want to point out this is a photograph. This is one of the first photographs I've showed you in class. Up to this point, we've only seen pictures, paintings, sketches. This picture was not taken while Jackson was president. You can see he's very elderly and just in his older years. But this is one of the first. This is the first picture taken of a former president. And for all the sketches, I'll go back one. Check this out. I mean, he's got the high forehead, he's got the poofy hair, he's got the long nose. I think all the sketches were pretty good because this is a picture of Andrew Jackson. He's got the high forehead and the poofy ears and the long nose. Pretty good sketches once we actually see the photograph as well. So just pointing that out, we are finally at photography. And in our class, I'm going to be able to show you a lot more photography going forward. Next, we have to define what is the bureaucracy, or rather, what is a bureaucrat. So a bureaucrat is a government worker. And the term is seen as negative. Okay, a bureaucracy represents government organizations that are slow, lots of red tape, dead weight workers. Sometimes bureaucrats get to keep their job for a long time, even if they're not very good at it. Almost impossible to fire them. Once they've been hired, it's almost impossible to fire them. They're known for their paperwork, mounds and mounds and mounds of paperwork. The term implies that they're getting in the way of progress, right? Andrew Jackson distrusts the bureaucrats that are in office, that are in their positions already. See, these bureaucrats have been put there by his opponents, and he wants to clean house. The phrase "drain the swamp," anybody? That phrase came into our national consciousness with Donald Trump. He wanted to drain the swamp of career politicians. Andrew Jackson, somewhat similar. He fires hundreds of bureaucrats who've been in their jobs, really maybe since the beginning of the New Republic, and he replaces them with his supporters, people who supported his campaign, maybe first in 1824, stuck with him, supported him in 1828. He fires John Quincy Adams's friends, and he replaces them with his friends. So this is going to create something known as the spoils system. The idea is that you can reward your campaign supporters with jobs. And this is going to create the next level of issues. A lot of people are going to throw their support behind the guy they think's going to win in hopes that they will get a job after the election is over, after their guy has won the office. And the reason it's called the spoils system is because it stinks. The phrase is, "To the victor goes the spoils of war." So the spoil system means you won the campaign, you won the election, but now you got to deal with all the stinky stuff that goes with it, which includes filling the jobs of the bureaucracy. So for Jackson, it's a win because he gets to put his supporters into the positions. But long term, it's kind of a loss because the process has become support a candidate, get a job, and sometimes our government just shifts back and forth, full of Republicans, full of Democrats, full of Republicans, full of Democrats. I don't care which side you're on. What you lose there is a lot of expertise. If someone has been doing their job for, let's say someone was president for 4 years, 8 years, and a bureaucrat has been doing their job for 4 or 8 years. They're getting good at it, and then they get fired and replaced with someone without experience just because there's a new president and that job is being filled by a brand new person with no experience. Well, if you ever wonder why your mail is so slow, it's because there's high turnover rate in postmasters. Actually, postmasters are not a job very often affected. Judges are always gets to stay in their position. But this next slide here, I think, will pretty well describe to you what is the bureaucracy. I've already said it's slow, red tape, lots of paperwork, gets in the way of progress. You guys know I'm a Diz nerd. I think the best way to describe a bureaucracy is flash, flash, the 100-yard dash, the sloths from Zootopia at the DMV. I know a lot of y'all are getting your learner's permit or getting your license. When you go to the DMV, better have some time on your hands. You better make it a whole morning or a whole day, because a lot of times the DMV is just known for being slow, and that's the reason that the sloths are in Zootopia. Great example of a bureaucracy. Now apply that to the executive branch, apply that to the court systems, apply that to all Department of Defense, all the things that a president can affect, all the cabinet positions that he hires. That's a bureaucracy, and it's not good for those to be slow. So again, for Jackson, he takes on the bureaucracy. He creates the spoils system. I already stated this. I'll show it to you on the screen there. To the victor goes the spoils of war, and it sets the precedent that if you win the election, you get to bring in your own supporters. The concern then is political corruption. What if someone is just supporting you in order to get a job? What if someone is donating to your campaign only to get a job? Maybe they don't even like you or believe in you, but it looks like you're going to win. I'm going to support you. I want a job out of it. And that also creates, the conditions of bribery. Like, if you support me, I will give you a job. It's just not good. It's not good all around. So the concern becomes political corruption. A side note here, talked about this in our day one class. We talked about how Andrew Jackson he had an attempted assassination on his life. One shot or one gun, no bang, two guns, no bang. Andrew Jackson doesn't hide behind his protection, his security detail. He pulls out his walking stick and starts beating on his would-be assassin. Well, that assassination attempt, why did this guy want to shoot at Andrew Jackson in the first place? It was because this man had felt he had been promised a job. He was a supporter of Andrew Jackson in the election, in the campaign. He felt that because he had supported Andrew Jackson, he was owed a job. Andrew Jackson didn't deliver the job to him, so the man decides to do a completely irrational thing, which is shoot at the president. As it were, Andrew Jackson's life was spared because both pistols malfunctioned. Demonstrates his toughness because he takes his walking stick to the young man and whacks him over the head with his walking stick. But really, the assassination attempt came about in the first place because of the spoils system, because this young man felt he was owed a job. He didn't get one, and, well, he thought it would be normal to kill the president as revenge for not getting a job. That's not normal. It is a piece of our history, though. So the spoils system, it stinks. To the victor goes the spoils. Unfortunately, possible corruption. All right, next up, another photograph of Andrew Jackson. You can see the prominent beak. His nose is definitely prominent, and still the high forehead and the poofy hair. So the photography still confirms all of these sketches that we have seen up to this point as well. This is going to be Jackson versus, gentlemen, go to your corners, come out punching, ding! Jackson versus nullification. So first of all, we have to define what is nullification, okay, vocab word. To nullify something means to cancel it. So if I nullify your recess in elementary school, I have canceled your recess. Or if I nullify your weekend plans, if I'm your parent, I'm grounding you maybe. I have nullified your weekend plans. That means to do away with. What does it mean in context of our government, context of Andrew Jackson? So here's the definition. The rights of a state to cancel out or not enforce, nullify, federal laws that they deem unconstitutional or unjust. Simply put, states' rights. The states have the right to cancel a law they disagree with. Hey, federal government, you don't have Georgia's best interests in mind. You're thinking about wealthy folks, not farming folks. So we're going to cancel out that law. No, sir, we're not enforcing that in Georgia. Well, the problem with that is that in a federal government, in our constitutional republic, have to give you a little bit of a government class here, We believe that the federal government can make laws for the whole country, and anything that the federal government doesn't comment on or doesn't make a law about, states have the rights to make laws for their states. And that is very specifically the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment in the Bill of Rights protects states' rights. Things not specifically listed in the Constitution belong to the states. So that is the 10th Amendment, and summarized as states' rights. States have the right to do what's right for them. Well, the controversy comes when a state says, I don't care that you've made a federal law. It ain't happening here. Okay, we're not enforcing that law here. Let's see if this happened in Andrew Jackson's presidency. Spoiler alert, it did. So in this example, South Carolina does exactly that. Andrew Jackson, in his federal government, passes a tariff, the federal tariff of 1832. A tariff is basically a tax. It was designed to help American industries. Okay, the tax is on imports, things coming into the country. So what that's supposed to make you do, it makes foreign goods more expensive, and American goods, it's supposed to make them more attractive to buy because there's not a tax on them. It's designed to help American industries, specifically textiles, which means manufactured clothing, makes foreign goods more expensive because they are taxed. So this is supposed to be like, yay, American goods. Well, the side effect here is that the British start buying less American cotton. Southern plantation owners are less able to sell their cotton, and thus prices go up. So it's a vicious cycle. We actually need to sell our cotton to the British. They manufacture goods in England, and those manufactured goods come back to triangular trade for me now. Those manufactured goods come back to the Americas in the form of manufactured goods, textiles, clothing, cloth, but it starts with the raw material, the cotton. Andrew Jackson thought he was helping American manufacturers. Unfortunately, the vicious cycle is that the British just stopped buying American cotton. They didn't care about manufacturing from that raw material. Vicious cycle. It hurt Southern farmers, growers, and sellers. South Carolina is home to many plantations and cotton growers. South Carolina does not like the tariff, complains about it at first, and up to the point of threatening to nullify the tariff. Hey, Andrew Jackson, we don't like your tariff. We are not enforcing it in South Carolina. The idea would be that South Carolina continues to sell with the British. Hey, British, sell, buy and sell with us, do trade with us, because we're not enforcing that tariff. Well, is South Carolina a part of the United States or not? That becomes a question. Jackson, okay, his whole legacy is going to be strengthening the position of the president. Jackson threatens to send in the military to collect the tariff. He says, listen, I'm the president. This tariff has been passed. And to collect my tariff, my tax, I will send in the military. Some are going to remember that King George III used the military to collect taxes back at the point of colonies, before we were the United States. Some are going to start to call Andrew Jackson King Mob. He's behaving like a king. He's behaving with, he's too strong for his position. He's mob rule, King Mob. We don't like Andrew Jackson. That's his critics. Of course, many people believe that, hey, South Carolina should have to pay just like the rest of us. Well, interesting twist of events here. The Vice President of the United States, Andrew Jackson's own Vice President, his name is John C. Calhoun. He is from South Carolina, and he leads a campaign in favor of nullification. So we got drama in the White House. President says, I will send in the military to collect this tariff. The Vice President says, I'm from South Carolina. I agree with South Carolina. Nullification is the state's right to cancel out a federal law. Okay, I'm in favor of nullification. Look at John C. Calhoun here. So first of all, what stands out to you? Might be the hair. It might be the eyes. But come down a little bit lower. My man's got a neck beard. He's got that salt and pepper hair coming out of his collar. Like, whoo, he is a hairy fella. So stare at that picture a little bit and just be glad that neck beards aren't still in. Another thing you might notice, he might be a time traveler. He might be Doc Brown from Back to the Future. They look pretty similar, if you ask me. So funny story about John C. Calhoun here. So I said there's drama in the White House. I want you to imagine the president and the vice president. They're at a dinner party. This is a true story. So one night they're at a cocktail party, and Andrew Jackson leads a toast. He raises his glass and he says, to our federal union. And then he looks right at his vice president and he says, may it last forever, right? His vice president is trying to nullify federal laws. He's threatening to lead South Carolina out of the union. This is the first stages of possible secession. Now, we're not going to arrive at the Civil War just yet, but South Carolina is starting the conversation for, is a state allowed to leave the United States? So at this cocktail party, to our federal union, may it last forever. He looks right at John C. Calhoun, and the tension was thick, right? Those who were in the room, they realized that mom and dad were fighting, right? President and vice president were fighting. There's another instance at another cocktail party where John C. Calhoun, he's given his thoughts on secession. He's given his thoughts on nullification in one corner of the room. Andrew Jackson, the boss, he's in the room as well. He hears this and he says, John Calhoun, if you secede from my nation, I will secede your head from your body. That's right. If South Carolina secedes from the nation, I will take your head off of your body all the same. So definitely fits the toughness of Andrew Jackson. Cheers to that. Well, in the end, let's find out how this ends. In the end, Henry Clay, who has always been known as the great compromiser, and we're going to see him again make some compromises. He negotiates a peace between Andrew Jackson and South Carolina. The tariff is lowered. Both sides are satisfied. Okay, the federal government is collecting its tariff. South Carolina says, okay, we can handle that. Trade resumes. But the whole thing shows that Andrew Jackson was willing to stand up for federal powers. He was willing to stand up for the strength of the presidency. Definitely demonstrated a backbone. He said, and he told states, you can't secede. You are united. You signed and ratified the Constitution. We're in this thing forever. But on the other hand, it showed that states were willing to take on the executive. Some states were willing to stand up for states' rights. A little bit more about John C. Calhoun. So the picture you're going to see here, this is John C. Calhoun was a senator. He was 2 times the vice president. He was actually vice president for John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. So he's a vice president for 2 different presidents. He's a slave owner. He was a racist. The writings and speeches of John C. Calhoun definitely belie his racial overtones. He was he believed that Africans in bondage were below their white plantation owners. And if you want to know the things that he'd written, I can show you the primary sources. This is John C. Calhoun's statue being removed from the South Carolina state capitol. For a long time, he was revered in South Carolina. This is a man we look up to. But amidst June of 2020 and the conversation going on in the country at that time frame, John C. Calhoun's statue was removed. And I know this is a big conversation for this class. Is a statue being removed a legacy being erased? Here's what Mr. Swanson would give to you. There's a big difference between erasing history and elevating villains. I don't want to erase the history of John C. Calhoun. I actually want us to know the full history of John C. Calhoun. I want us to look at every racist word he ever wrote. I don't want to erase him. I want us to understand him and not be like him. But I do not think we need statues to elevate the villains of the story of us as well. So his statue was removed from Charleston, South Carolina in June of 2020. And that's a picture of that. Andrew Jackson, let's round out his legacy here. So a very complicated legacy. And here's some of the accomplishments. So again, we're finishing up a 2-day class period here. So hopefully you remember backwards yesterday as well. First of all, the creation of the modern Democratic Party. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, they're going to look back to Andrew Jackson as the first president of the Democrat political party. So he is the father or the beginner of the modern Democrat Party, sometimes called Jacksonian Democrats. Today, of course, just known as Democrats. And he gives them their logo as well, which if you don't remember that, slide on back to yesterday's audio guide to find out why the Democrats have a donkey as their logo. It starts with Andrew Jackson. He is known for protecting popular democracy. A lot of times these are called the common man values. He expanded voting rights with universal white male suffrage. He was swept into office by the common man voter, the frontiersmen who maybe didn't necessarily own land, those who are not wealthy, like himself, orphaned, a veteran, didn't come from wealth. Those are the common men. and he spent his whole political career fighting for and protecting the common man. And the democracy we have today, a lot of that stems from Andrew Jackson's efforts. He expanded the use of the presidential veto, and that is a major way that he strengthened the executive. Stumbled over my words there. Using the veto, he told Congress, hey, you put it on my desk doesn't mean I'm going to sign it. And if Congress didn't have enough votes to override the veto, well, he put a stop to that legislation right there. So he used the veto more than any of his predecessors, more than any other president that came against him. And of course, he campaigned against the National Bank, and he did away with, he killed the National Bank. The irony, of course, is that he is on the $20 bill. So here is a whole picture of the $20 bill, and maybe you recognize it now. Like I said, you might have a Jackson in your pocket right now. So question for you, and this is a deep thought, question for you. As we've discussed the negatives of his legacy, do we agree with Andrew Jackson being on the $20 bill? Is he the kind of man that we want to elevate by being on our currency? And, you know, actually the most frequently printed currency is the $20 bill. Do we want Andrew Jackson to be on the $20 bill? Well, little known fact, it hasn't happened yet, but we have been in a national conversation about exactly that. And our decision makers, okay, our elected leaders have decided that Andrew Jackson will be replaced on the $20 bill with Harriet Tubman. So I don't know if this is the exact picture they're going to use of Harriet Tubman. The actual currency has not been printed yet. It has been actually kicked on down the line several times already. It was supposed to be printed inside of the Trump administration, and it got, pushed back 1 year, pushed back 2 years, and there's a lengthy story to that. Believe it or not, the Department of the Treasury printing bills isn't just easy like that. So there's a long conversation about when we're going to print a certain amount of bills. Long story short, Harriet Tubman is set to be printed on the $20 bill in the year 2030, okay, 2030. So they moved it on down the line, and I don't know if it'll get moved again, but here's what I want you to do. If you're listening to this video right now, whether in my class or from the corners of the internet that brought you to this video, when you get a Harriet Tubman $20 bill in your pocket, give me a holler, right? You will be graduated out of school by that point, maybe out of college, maybe with a family of your own. But when you get a Harriet Tubman $20 bill in your pocket, give me a call, and we can remember our old history class days together. So his legacy is that he's on the $20 bill, but I also think part of his legacy is that he's leaving the $20 bill because his status as a slave owner, his oppression of Native Americans do we want to elevate him as a hero? Big question. Long story short, Harriet Tubman is set to replace him. There's a negative side of his legacy, celebrated by some as an advocate for the common man. Jacksonian democracy or common man politics, any of those phrases are going to be the positives, the thumbs up of Andrew Jackson's legacy, and some people celebrate him. On the other hand, he's bigoted, stomped on the rights of so many groups and people for his own interests, right? You could say that he climbed to the top by stomping on everyone else beneath him, and certainly oppressed and weaker people groups like the Native Americans. He was a slave owner for sure. He owned many slaves. So he's bigoted in that regard, brash, aggressive, and that is a part of his legacy as well. So like with most historical figures, there's a balance involved, and it is worth looking at both sides. That concludes our conversation about Andrew Jackson. Briefly, this is the best part to fit this into our class. So we're going to talk about the Second Great Awakening, and if you'll turn in your workbook, your toolbox, you will see a page that has some definitions for the Second Great Awakening. So Second Great Awakening is characterized as several social movements, many of them religiously motivated. We've had a First Great Awakening, right? For it to be the second, we have to have had a first. The First Great Awakening we talked about inside of colonies and gave a focus on the individual religious experience. The Second Great Awakening is going to be Christians putting their works to good. They're going to do good works for the country. And the picture you see here, so we analyze a lot of pictures in this class. The character says, as God has worked for us, so we will work for others. And the tables here, it's almost like choose your efforts. Okay, I mean, which one do you want to focus on? And there's going to be key leaders for each one. Sometimes they crossed over and they supported each other, but sometimes, there's this guy focused on that, and there's that woman focused on that. So the big ones are going to be temperance, abolition, women's rights, which is called suffrage, and public education. Temperance, abolition, women's rights or suffrage, the right to vote, and public education. So let's just jump into them. Great little definition there. I'll let you read that on your own. And kind of a good starting point here. A second great religious revival in the country associated with the age of Jackson and the rise of the common man. A lot of these do-gooders, Christian do-gooders, were commoners, and they found a place inside of Jacksonian democracy to actually move their efforts. So, and then most notable, these are the four we're going to talk about. I want you to think of them like this. I'll give it to you in an acronym: TASNE. Temperance, abolition, suffrage, and education. So you can remember with the acronym TASNE. And now I'll briefly go over each one. So temperance is the idea of saying no to alcohol, right? If I am temperate in my nature, that's not temperature. Okay, it's hot outside. The temperature is hot. Temperate means even keeled. So a drunkard is the opposite of that, right? A drunkard is high, low, but someone who is temperate has a mellow personality, is not prone to mood swings or emotional ups and downs. And specifically, the word is saying no to alcohol. The big idea is that alcohol is harmful to the American family and should be prohibited. Dad drinks, come home and beats mom or beats the kids. Not good. Dad drinks away the family income, the family fortune. Family has to live in poverty. Not good. So I don't know what you think about alcohol. I don't know what your family thinks about alcohol. I'm not judging someone who has a beer at a football game. The attitude in the country right here was don't drink alcohol, abstain from alcohol. Temperance is to say no to alcohol. And the reason, here's the religious perspective, was to help the American family. Temperance. The next up here is women's suffrage, the right to vote. And I apologize, a little bit out of order for my acronym there. I'll probably fix this on the slides, but on my audio guide, I'm a little out of order here. Next up is women's suffrage, the right to vote. A key leader in women's suffrage is Susan B. Anthony. So there's a cartoon picture of her, another sketch picture of her. There is photography of Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony is going to eclipse time periods. She's going to be mentioned several times in our class going forward, starting it here, but we will be with her all the way up into the Civil War. And eventually women getting the right to vote, we look backwards to her and her efforts. So women's suffrage is not suffering, okay? Like that CrossFit workout made me suffer. That is not it. Suffrage is actually a good thing because suffrage is the right to vote. And in this case, women's suffrage, women's right to vote. We'll look for minority suffrage or African-American suffrage as well. Suffrage is the right to vote. Key leader, Susan B. Anthony. And it goes back to our founding documents, all men created equal. Well, the word men is there, but women are going to start to say, us too, we deserve to vote too. And we're going to continue to follow the women's movement for rights. It's going to first be the right to vote. Then it's going to be the right to work. Then it's going to be the right for equal pay and immersion into society. And quite frankly, it's a conversation we are still in as humans, as a people group. So suffrage. Next up is education, public education, improved public education for all. Okay, that's going to be a key component here. You can look backwards to some of our early colonies, the Puritan communities. They valued education. If your community was of a certain size, I think it was if you have 50 families, you have to have a public school. That starts in the New England colonies. Well, a key leader here is going to be Horace Mann. Horace Mann is going to believe that everybody needs to learn. And that is a good Christian attitude. Okay, there's an equality piece to it. But there's another big idea here. And the idea is that we need an educated public because they're voting for our leaders. We need people who are educated to make wise choices at the ballot box. I don't care if you vote for this party or that party, but please at least be educated about it. Horace Mann is going to say this starts in schools. This starts young. Okay, we can't have educated adults just like that. We got to have years of growth And quite frankly, you being in a public school today is because of Horace Mann's efforts that started in the 1820s. So these kids right here would say they get to go to school. I'm so glad I don't have to work in the fields today. I get to go to school. I know when your alarm clock goes off, you're like, oh, I have to go to school again today. Shift your attitude. Shift your attitude towards I get to go to school, just like these kids. They were glad that they got to go to school. Now, there wasn't mandatory attendance. Many of them did drop out young, or parents would bring them home for the harvest time, and there'd be gaps in their education. But when they got to go, they didn't say they had to go. They said they got to go, and their attitude followed. Also, another thing, and this is a Horace Mann belief, the other thing is that an educated public will commit fewer crimes. If we put a focus on public education, if we put an emphasis on intellectual growth, people won't commit as many crimes. They will be able to get jobs. They won't have to devolve into crime, or they will be able to know the difference between right and wrong and won't commit as many crimes. So yes, it's nice to say everybody should go to school. There are some practical reasons behind it as well. And finally, the A of the acronym is abolition. Take the word there, and your root is abolish. Abolish is to do away with. What are we doing away with? Well, abolitionists believe in abolishing slavery. This was not gradual emancipation. This was not take the African Americans and relocate them to Africa, recolonize them in Africa. An abolitionist says totally get rid of slavery now. Not just preventing its expansion, okay, new states and new territories, not just that. There is no toleration for a North or a South divide. Anyone in chains should be freed. Let's abolish slavery. That is the belief of an abolitionist. So I'll give you the acronym again: temperance, abolition, suffrage, education, TAS and E. Even though I didn't say them in that order, I apologize. This concludes day 2 of Andrew Jackson. This is a great video for you to watch. Was Andrew Jackson America's craziest president? All the things I've just told you be illustrated in this video as well. There's another short clip about Andrew Jackson that comes from a series called The Ultimate Guide to the President. It is a very good clip. You have plenty of things to do and plenty of time to do it. So I do look forward to being back soon. And I've missed you. I hope you've missed me. Either way, I'll be back, done with my time in my National Guard training for August and September of 2023. And the story of us remains to be continued. Mr. Swanson, signing off.